They say walls have ears, but in her house, it was her voice I couldn't escape. When I first moved into her house, I didn't think much about the sound of footsteps above my ceiling. Old houses creak, after all. The staircases breathe with age, and the wooden beams carry every echo. But soon, I realized it wasn't the house I was listening for. It was her. She was my landlady, 43, maybe 44, with a quiet grace about her that felt more commanding than anything loud or flashy. She carried herself like someone who had lived enough years to know her worth, but there was still something almost fragile behind her eyes. I noticed it in the way her smile lingered too long, as if she was afraid it might disappear. At 26, I should have been focused on starting fresh in a new place, paying rent on time, and keeping to myself. But something about her presence made the air in that house feel charged, as though every glance we exchanged had a weight to it. The walls between our spaces were thin. At night, I could hear the faint rhythm of her television upstairs, the hum of her kettle as she prepared tea, even the soft sound of her laughter when she spoke on the phone. I told myself it was nothing, just part of living under someone else's roof. But the truth is, I started listening for it. I waited for it. One evening, as I was unpacking boxes in my small room downstairs, I heard her voice through the ceiling, calm, warm, with a faint sternness. "Stay quiet upstairs," she said, not directly to me, but more like a reminder, a boundary set in her own space. It wasn't meant for my ears, but it found me anyway. The words struck something inside me. They carried more than just authority. They carried intimacy, like an accidental invitation. I froze, holding a book in my hands, listening to the hush that followed. My chest tightened. It wasn't the words themselves that mattered, but the way her voice curved around them, steady, feminine, and unknowingly magnetic. From that moment, I became more aware of her. The way she descended the staircase in the mornings, wrapped in a soft sweater, her hair tied back loosely, her bare feet making barely a sound on the wooden steps. The way she greeted me with a polite nod, her eyes meeting mine only for a breath before shifting away. Every detail seemed magnified, as though the house itself was conspiring to pull me into her orbit. I began to notice her habits. She liked jasmine tea in the evenings. She hummed softly when she watered the plants by the window. She left her bedroom lamp on until late, casting a golden glow that spilled faintly through the crack beneath her door. And every little thing, every sound, every flicker of light, drew me closer to the truth I wasn't yet ready to admit. I was no longer just a tenant. I was a man drawn to the woman who owned not just the house, but slowly, piece by piece, my attention, my thoughts, my restless heart. Living beneath her meant living inside a rhythm that wasn't mine, and little by little, her rhythm began to seep into me. It wasn't just the sounds anymore, it was the silences, the pauses between footsteps, the hush after laughter, the way the house seemed to grow still when she lingered on the stairs. I started to notice how my own breathing would match that stillness, as if I were waiting for her to make the next move. One Saturday morning, our first Real crossing happened. I was in the small kitchen downstairs, spreading butter on a piece of toast when the back door creaked open. She stepped in, carrying a basket of laundry against her hip. The morning light spilled across her face, softening the faint lines near her eyes, and for the first time, I caught myself staring too long. "Morning," she said, her voice even, though her eyes flicked to mine for only a second. "Morning," I replied, suddenly hyper-aware of the mug in my hand, the crumbs on the counter, the fact that my t-shirt was a little wrinkled. She had that effect. She made me want to straighten myself out, to be seen in the best possible way. She set the basket down, and, as she brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek, her sleeve slipped just enough to reveal the soft curve of her wrist. A simple, ordinary movement, but my chest tightened as though I'd witnessed something I wasn't supposed to. "You've settled in all right?" she asked, keeping her tone polite, measured. "Yeah," I said, and then, too quickly, "The walls are thinner than I expected." Her eyes lingered on me this time. Not long, but long enough. A quiet tension threaded the air between us. I wasn't sure if she had heard the hidden meaning in my words, or if I was imagining the shift in her expression, the brief flicker of recognition, the trace of a smile she quickly hid by turning back to her laundry. "You'll get used to it," she replied, her tone steady again, as though nothing had slipped through. But I caught it, the hesitation, the almost. As she left the kitchen, basket in her arms, she brushed past me. Not enough to be an accident, not enough to be intentional. Just enough that the fabric of her sweater grazed against my arm. A fleeting touch, but it left heat where it landed. I swallowed hard, pretending to sip my coffee, but my mind was already replaying that moment over and over. That night, I heard her again, laughter, soft and unguarded, carrying down through the ceiling. I lay awake, staring at the shadows on my wall. Every sound she made pulling me closer to a truth I couldn't deny anymore. She wasn't just my landlady. She was the secret pulse of the house, the reason the silence felt heavy, the reason my thoughts refused to stay my own. And though neither of us had said it out loud, something had shifted. A line had been crossed, not with words, not with confessions, but with a glance too long and a brush too close. And I knew, from that moment on, nothing in that house would feel simple again. Days turned into weeks, and I started to realize how silence itself could be a kind of language between us. It wasn't empty. It was thick, charged, almost alive. When she walked into a room, I felt it before I saw her. When she paused before speaking, I held my breath without meaning to. One evening, I came home later than usual, the autumn air clinging to my jacket, my hands chilled from the night. The house was quiet except for a dim glow upstairs. Her lamp, as always, spilled soft golden light beneath her door. I tried to move quietly, but the wooden floor betrayed me with a groan. A moment later, her door opened. She stepped out, wrapped in a robe, her hair falling loose over her shoulders. She looked less like the composed landlady I usually saw and more like a woman caught between weariness and thought. For a second, I almost turned away, but her eyes found mine before I could. "You're home late," she said softly. Not accusing, not even curious, just noticing. "Work ran over," I replied. My voice was lower than usual, like the hour demanded a quieter honesty. She leaned lightly against the doorway, arms folded, as if debating whether to retreat or remain. I couldn't help but notice how the robe hung loosely around her, how she drew it tighter with one hand, as if suddenly remembering I was there. "I was making tea," she said after a pause. "Would you like some?" It was the first invitation, small, harmless on the surface, but beneath it lay something fragile and daring. I nodded, maybe too eagerly, and followed her into the kitchen. The space was lit only by the soft overhead light, casting warm shadows across the counters. She moved gracefully, though there was a quiet nervousness in the way she busied her hands, filling the kettle, reaching for cups, avoiding my eyes for just a moment too long. I sat at the table, watching her, struck by how ordinary the scene was and yet how extraordinary it felt to be there with her at this hour. When she set the cup in front of me, our fingers brushed, just lightly, just enough. Her hand lingered for a second longer than it needed to, and when she pulled it back, her eyes flickered up to mine, a glance, a question, maybe even a warning. We sat across from each other, steam rising between us, the silence pressing in like a third presence. She sipped her tea, her lips catching the edge of the cup, and I realized I was staring. She noticed too. Her cheeks warmed slightly, and she lowered her gaze, smiling faintly as if to herself. No words were spoken about what hung between us, but the silence said enough. It said that she was aware of me, maybe more than she wanted to be. It said that I was no longer just a tenant. And as I sat there, watching her fingers curl around the cup, feeling the echo of her touch still burning in my hand, I understood the truth. Silence could bind two people together even more tightly than words. It's strange how quickly routine can shift when another person starts living inside your thoughts. For weeks, the thin walls had made me a listener to her footsteps, her laughter, the late-night sound of her turning pages in bed. But by now, it wasn't only me listening. She had begun to notice me, too. One rainy evening, the storm pressing against the windows, I sat at my desk downstairs pretending to work. In truth, I was listening to the rain tap on the roof above her room, to the rhythm of her movement as she paced. Then silence, a heavy pause that made me glance upward. Moments later, there was a gentle knock at my door. When I opened it, she stood there, framed by the soft glow of the hallway light. She wore a long cardigan over simple clothes, her hair tied back loosely. In her hands, she held 2 mugs. "I made too much," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Thought you might want some." I stepped aside, and she entered, her presence shifting the small room's air instantly. She placed the mugs on the desk and sat down without asking, as if she had already decided that tonight the walls didn't matter. For a while, we said nothing, only listening to the storm outside. I watched the way her fingers tapped lightly against the ceramic mug, how her eyes seemed to wander everywhere but me. Finally, she spoke. "It's odd, isn't it? Living so close to someone. You end up knowing things you're not supposed to." I swallowed hard. Her words carried more meaning than they seemed on the surface. "I guess it's hard to ignore," I admitted. My voice came out low, hesitant. Her eyes lifted to mine, then, steady, unblinking. "Do you ever wonder if the house listens back? If it keeps the things we don't say?" Her words struck me deeper than I expected. For a moment, I didn't know whether she was joking or confessing something she couldn't quite name. I searched her face, the curve of her mouth, the flicker of vulnerability in her gaze. "I think it does," I finally said. "And maybe it waits for us to admit them out loud." Her lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to reply, but instead she only exhaled and looked away. Her hand moved to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a small gesture, but one that revealed the faintest tremor. I wanted to reach out to steady her hand, to tell her she wasn't the only one holding something unspoken. But I didn't. The storm outside cracked with thunder, and the silence between us deepened again. Not empty, but alive with possibility. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Good night," she said, but her voice lingered a fraction too long, as if reluctant to let go. And as the door closed softly behind her, I realized the walls weren't the only ones listening. My heart was too. The days after the storm felt different, as though the house itself had shifted. The air carried a heaviness, but not the kind that pressed you down. It was the kind that lingered on your skin, waiting to be acknowledged. Every time we crossed paths in the kitchen or on the stairs, her eyes seemed to pause on me a moment longer. Every word felt careful, measured, like we were both trying not to spill what had already begun to overflow. One evening, I found her in the garden out back. The sun was fading, leaving streaks of gold across the damp grass. She was kneeling near the flower beds, tugging gently at weeds, her sweater sleeves rolled up. There was something almost vulnerable in the sight, her hands covered in soil, her brow slightly furrowed in thought. "You spent a lot of time out here," I said, stepping closer. My voice broke the quiet, and she glanced up quickly, surprised but not displeased. "It's peaceful," she replied, brushing the dirt from her palms. "The plants don't ask questions. They just grow." Her words carried a weight that went deeper than gardening. I lowered myself onto the stone edge beside her, close enough to smell the faint mix of earth and jasmine from her sleeves. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick again, but this time it pulled us closer instead of apart. As she reached for a small trowel, her hand brushed mine. Not a fleeting graze like before, but a touch that stayed. Her fingers lingered against my skin, uncertain yet unwilling to retreat. My chest tightened, my breath caught. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes steady, guarded, yet vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. It wasn't the look of a landlady to a tenant. It was the look of a woman standing at the edge of something she couldn't quite name. She began, her voice soft, but the sentence faded before it found its end. I didn't move my hand away. Instead, I turned it slightly, letting her fingers rest against my palm. The smallest gesture, but it felt like the loudest confession I could make without words. Her lips parted, as though she might protest, but no words came. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Her hand trembled faintly against mine, not with fear, but with the weight of a choice she hadn't yet decided to make. For what felt like forever, we sat there, caught between hesitation and surrender. The world around us blurred, the fading sun, the damp grass, the quiet hum of insects. All that remained sharp was the heat of her skin against mine. When she finally pulled her hand back, she did it slowly, as if afraid of breaking something delicate. She stood, brushing the dirt from her jeans, her composure returning in fragments. "We should go inside," she said, her tone measured, but her eyes lingered on me just a heartbeat too long. And in that heartbeat, I understood. The line between us hadn't just blurred, it had dissolved. After the garden evening, the air between us felt charged in a way we could no longer ignore. We still moved through the house with politeness. Greetings on the stairs, soft good mornings in the kitchen, but beneath those small exchanges lay something deeper, something waiting. It was late one night when it finally came to the surface. I was in the living room, a book open in my hands, though I hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. The rain had returned, steady against the windows, filling the silence with its rhythm. Then I heard the creak of the stairs. She appeared in the doorway, barefoot, wearing a long cardigan that fell loosely over her shoulders. She hesitated for a moment, as though deciding whether to speak, then smiled faintly. "Can't sleep?" she asked. I shook my head, setting the book aside. "Not with this storm." She stepped further into the room, her arms folded across herself, as though shielding from more than just the chill. "Mind if I sit?" "Of course not." She lowered herself onto the couch beside me, close enough that the faint warmth of her skin reached me even through the air between us. For a long time, neither of us said a word. The rain spoke for us, filling the silence, pressing us closer. When she finally shifted, her knee brushed against mine. Neither of us moved away. Her hand rested lightly on the cushion, just inches from mine. I could see the faint tremor in her fingers, the careful way she kept them still. Sometimes she began softly, her eyes fixed on the window. "This house feels too big, too quiet." Her words carried a confession she hadn't meant to give. I swallowed, my throat dry. "It doesn't feel so quiet anymore," I said gently. Her head turned then, her eyes finding mine. The look held, steady, searching, vulnerable. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. The rain, the storm, the weight of years and roles, all of it faded. I reached out slowly, careful not to break the fragile thread between us, and let my hand brush against hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled slightly, hesitant but willing, resting against mine. The silence deepened. My chest rose and fell with a breath that felt too loud in the quiet. I could see the faint rise of color in her cheeks, the way her lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. Then, almost without thinking, she leaned ever so slightly toward me. Not enough to erase the space entirely, but enough that I could feel the nearness of her breath mingling with mine, the warmth of her presence wrapping around me. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The closeness itself was louder than any gesture could have been. It was a pause, a suspension, a promise lingering in the space between us. When she finally pulled back, it was slow, reluctant. Her eyes lingered on mine, soft and unguarded, before she whispered, "Good night." But the way she said it, with a tremor of warmth she couldn't hide, told me it wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something neither of us could deny any longer. The morning after that storm-filled night felt different. The air in the house seemed softer, as if even the walls knew what had nearly happened between us. I woke early, restless, the memory of her nearness replaying in my mind like a song that refused to fade. Every detail lingered, the warmth of her hand, the way her breath had brushed against mine, the quiet tremor in her voice when she said good night. I found her in the kitchen, standing by the window with a mug in her hands. The morning light spilled across her face, catching the faintest trace of tiredness beneath her eyes. When she turned, our gazes met, and for a moment we simply stood there, caught in the quiet truth that something had changed. "Coffee," she asked, her voice steady, though her hand tightened slightly on the mug. "Please," I replied, moving closer. My heart was steady but heavy, carrying everything I hadn't yet said. As she poured, her sleeve brushed against mine, a small touch, but it carried the same weight as the night before. I knew then that we couldn't go back. Not to silence, not to pretending. About last night, I began, my words trailing. Her hand paused on the counter, the coffee pot still in her grip. Slowly, she set it down and turned toward me. Her eyes held mine, searching, steady but vulnerable. "We shouldn't," she whispered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her heart. "I know," I admitted, "but we already have." The truth hung between us, undeniable. Her lips parted slightly, as if to argue, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her gaze, her shoulders softening as though she had been carrying the weight of that denial for too long. I stepped closer, careful, deliberate. "I don't want to cross lines you don't want me to," I said quietly. "But if this is something you feel too, I can't keep pretending I don't." Her breath caught, her chest rising with the weight of hesitation. And then, finally, she looked up at me. Her eyes were softer now, the guardedness melting into something deeper, something true. She reached for my hand, not accidentally this time, not fleeting. Her fingers slid into mine, firm and certain. The warmth of her touch spread through me like light breaking open the dark. "I've been trying not to," she admitted, her voice low, fragile but real. "But you're here, and every day it's harder to ignore." Relief and longing crashed together inside me, leaving me almost breathless. I squeezed her hand gently, grounding her, grounding myself. We didn't need a kiss to seal it. The closeness, the honesty, the simple intertwining of our hands said enough. It was a beginning carved out of silence, a fragile bond strengthened by every glance, every unspoken truth. As we stood there, morning light filling the kitchen, the storm of doubt finally eased. What had once been forbidden now felt inevitable. Two lives crossing in ways no rule, no wall could keep apart. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow-burn romance tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have stayed quiet or spoken your heart? Your support means everything.